Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Radio Dead Air Tech Q&A. You've got questions. We've got guesses. I'm Nash, been doing Radio Dead Air for damn near 25 years. But in addition to that, I'm also an IT professional. With me, as always, my producer, Mike Gehrman, who also works in IT. If you have tech questions for us, you can send those to requests at radiodeadair.com. How you doing, Mike? What? Dang, that's nice. Uh-huh. Can't hear Mike? What? Why can't you hear Mike? This stupid. Why isn't it working? What the hell? What is going on here, damn thing? Okay, here. Why is that not working? Yeah, hold on. That's why. Stupid thing. Yeah. All right. Say something now. Well, I just say something. What in the love of fuck is going on here?
I mean, I should. Why am I checking my stuff? You can hear me, so if you can hear me, obviously it's on
This
your
thing
end.
is all it's all screwed up. All the
Wait, there we go. They said they can
yeah,
hear me
I
now.
know it's screwed up, but all the reading all the channels are all screwed up. What the fuck? I'll have to mess with this damn thing later.
Okay.
Well, at least it's working for right now. Anyway.
Yes.
All right.
So what I was saying when I was muted was the one thing I don't do in IT is work another Friday this year, which is cool because we have this thing at work. You know, if you're there for your first 3 years, you get this amount of leave per pay period, and if from after year 3 to year 15, you get this amount of leave per pay period. And after year 15, you get this amount of leave per pay period, which is a day per pay period. And you can only carry over so much of it. And this is the kicker. If you don't use your use or lose leave, your boss can get in trouble.
What?
Like if you don't use 2 hours of it, they're like, yeah, that's 2 hours. Yeah, that can happen. If you don't use 40 hours of it, they're like, you didn't let the guy have a week and his week off this year. What's going on?
What? Well, yeah, we've got some news. Yeah, we got some news this week. It's a little slow because we're on the edge of we're on the edge of a whole lot of shit next week.
And it's also coming into, it's a little early to say it, but it's coming into the Christmas season, and so the big announcements should have already all happened for stuff that people be buying, so that the hype would be there. Because you don't want to make your big announcement the day before Thanksgiving, because no one's going to know.
We do have some news on the Ryzen 7 9800X3D. And it's not a ton, but what we do know is actually kind of interesting. And dare I say it bodes a little well? I don't know. We'll find out. All right. So up until now, the Ryzen 9000 series, at least on desktop, has been a little bit of a disappointment, a little bit of a flop. And the main reason,
I wouldn't say a flop, I'd say a letdown.
Well, it hasn't produced any performance gains to any, degree of noticeable degree over Ryzen 7000.
Yeah.
So it really wasn't seen as much of an upgrade. Now, on the server side of things, the new Zen 5 core stuff is doing great. However, the one for desktop that hadn't come out yet was the X3D. And the first one of those, the Ryzen 7 X3D, is coming in, I think, November 7th. It's coming fairly soon. When's the release date here? Yeah, November 7th. So we have gotten some information. Now, we don't have hard benchmarks yet, but we do have some information about it that
we have some sort of screenshots is what we have.
But the important, interesting part about this is they have made some changes to the X3D setup. Not the one we were hoping they were going to do, which was put extra cache on both CCDs, both of the core modules.
Yeah. Which
would have
nice.
been, yeah.
Would have been very nice, but it would have also made it significantly more expensive.
I don't know how much more expensive would have honestly been, considering
but
it's
you're doubling a component, so
they're doubling the component, but it's just RAM anyway. The part that has changed here, the interesting part, is how they're doing the X3D. AMD's X3D RAM, what makes it so significant is, up until now, they managed to take a regular slab of silicon, the core, one of the cores for a Ryzen CPU, and they take a layer of extra RAM and plug it directly on top. They just layer the two of them together.
And as we've said before, shorter traces means faster response.
And that was, up until now, apparently, that was all they could do. But it was causing a problem.
Heat.
The way CPUs get rid of heat is there's a big old chunk of nickel-plated copper on top. That's called the heat spreader. You can actually see it.
And we say big old for something that weighs a few grams, is basically.
Yeah. Well, compared to the silicon, it's pretty big. Yes. You can see it in that picture right there. That part that says AMD Ryzen. That is the heat spreader right there. That's the part that is supposed to be metal. And underneath that is a layer of indium solder that goes directly to the silicon. So it goes from the silicon to the solder, the heat spreader, and then whatever heat solution you put, whatever cooler you put right on top of it. So
with the memory in the way, it doesn't get the heat out as effectively. So of course they can't crank the clock speed up. So it's a trade-off. You're getting a faster memory response for a lot of things, but at a lower clock speed.
Yeah, because it was like putting a layer of insulation on top of the CPU. It couldn't transfer the heat as effectively through that layer of RAM to the heat spreader. The 9800X3D is interesting because they finally figured out, and they didn't know how to do this until now. They figured out how to take the RAM from on top and put it underneath. So now,
I'm not going to lie, Nash. I would have thought that would be fairly straightforward. I mean, you've got pins, the pinouts, where the chip goes in the socket that you've got to get around. But I would have thought that'd be fairly straightforward.
There were some engineering challenges they had to work around to make it work properly. Part of it is the Infinity Fabric being an issue there, and latency. Because with the RAM in the way of the Infinity Fabric, from where the cores... See, the way a Ryzen CPU works, for those of you out there who don't know how this works, is there are between 1 and 2 of these things called CCDs, chiplets. They have the cores in them. Then in addition to that, there's another unit that handles memory control, system on a chip, all the other stuff that doesn't need to be on the best lithography, doesn't need to be the best and fastest silicon. They put it on
and then you've got the thing that makes it all talk to each other.
That's the Infinity Fabric. So the problem was you had to put the RAM underneath the CCD, it also had to not increase the latency of the cores talking to the control chip and talking to the other, and when there were two CCDs talking to each other. Increasing latency there means the whole thing slows down and it causes problems for the system. They have figured out how to do it now. Without increasing latency, they figured out how to move the X3D RAM from on top of the CCD to underneath it. This means that now there is no insulation layer on top of the X3D cores anymore. They are directly touching the indium solder and the heatsink now. So just like any other Ryzen CPU. Overclocking is unlocked on these now. Out of the box, it's already starting at 200 gigahertz higher, or 200 megahertz, sorry. 200,
gigahertz
so it's
would be at extreme.
Yeah, it would be extreme. It's gone from 5 point, let's see. Oh crap, what did they increase it from? Well, it's gone to 5.2, and the base clock is even faster as well. Why that matters is in a bunch of games, even to this day, multi-core performance is not a big a deal as what we call single thread. Just one core doing one job and as fast as it can. That's when those speeds really matter. All core, when you put all the cores on a CPU into boost mode, they all have to go a little bit slower because they're all generating heat. But if it's just one, it can boost higher. And that's important for games because games like single core going, super fast. The faster they can make the single core, that means it can perform better in games. And because it can dissipate heat better, it can perform better in multi-core, which was the big failing of the previous X3D CPUs. They weren't as fast as their non-X3D counterparts. This looks like they're going to be as fast as the non-X3D and have the bonus RAM. So these are going to be fairly impressive. The only problem is how much more impressive than what we already have. That's the question. Now, obviously, in gaming, we are going to see some performance, but even AMD is only saying, or Gigabyte is saying they're only going to see between 4 and 5% performance improvement. That's not fantastic, but the bonus here is that as an X3D, it's now they've created an all-arounder. They now have a CPU that can perform excellently in work type tasks, video rendering, compiling, all that stuff, and in gaming. So now they have the all-rounder that they've kind of been lacking for a long time. AMD CPUs were kind of divided by if you wanted gaming, you got an X3D. If you wanted work stuff, you got a non-X3D. And it still could do games, but not as fast as the X3D. Now they have all-rounder. And we're also going to see what happens when the 79 or the 9950 X3D, those aren't coming for a while yet, but the bigger brothers of the 9800 X3D, I think they actually I don't think they're releasing a 9900 X3D. I think it's only a 9950 X3D. I could be wrong.
I'm not going to be paying for one of those, so I haven't terribly paid attention to that level.
Now, the trouble here is already the 1700 X3D has gone, well, pretty much out of stock because people saw the performance of the 9000 series and went, yeah, no, I'm going to get the fast one. And that's what they did. They got the fast one. At one point, the 1700 X3D was all the way down to around $350. Now it's back up to around $450, $460, $470. Well, the price of the 9800 X3D is going to be something like $480 US, which is already the 7800X3D was $450. So this is already a $30 increase. And that's the amount of money that increase. It's like, that's just because we can. We're going to charge you the extra $30 just because we can. Now, for a certain type of gamer who wants the absolute fastest performance, who wants all of the frames possible from their video card, this is going to be, a no-brainer. But for everybody else, you have to wonder, is there really a huge difference between, say, 180 frames and 200 frames? If you're like super hyper competitive in Fortnite, maybe. But everybody else, you got to sit there and go, is it really worth it? Also, keep in mind when you start getting to 4K gaming, even then, we're getting even more diminishing returns if you get to like 1440p and 4K. The more workload that goes off of the CPU and back onto the video card, the less the CPU plays into it. So these single core speed improvements aren't going to be, as massive. So it's great. And for bragging rights, it's certainly fantastic for AMD. They officially will have the fastest gaming CPU on the planet yet again. The only question is, is it going to be worth it to people to pay like almost $500, actually $500 with tax and stuff for this? It is an impressive feat, though, being able to do what they did with the RAM. We may get to a point like with depending, dare I say,
I suspect what they might do next is they put one part of RAM on the bottom, then they'll put another part of RAM on the top, and have both components having their own.
Well, if they put it back on top, then they have the insulation issue again.
Right. But then they have both sets of chiplets having RAM, and then they say, okay, we've got this done, so we can. Yeah, it's cranked down a big bit on the clock speed again, but we got a huge performance boost out of it.
Yeah, but if they crank down the clock speed, then we're back to the problem of they're not being as fast as the non-X3D. I think what they're going to do is, probably for the 10,000 series, if we get lucky, they may just stop doing X3D as a separate thing altogether. It might just be, here's Ryzen from now.
Chip.
Right. Yeah. They do that as the default. Now, they might not do it for every chip they might like do it for the Ryzen 5, but they might not have like a separate Ryzen 7 non-X3. They might have that being part of the product stack going forward. It would certainly, it all depends on how much extra cost this really entails. But in any event, we'll see when this comes out in a few days. Next week, actually. We'll see how it actually stacks up. Also, well, we're not going to see how this stacks up for a while, and good, because screw them. Microsoft's AI recall. You may remember this if you need a refresher. Microsoft, as part of their AI push with their Copilot and all this other nonsense, added
also
a
known as
function.
their massive stupidity push.
Yeah. Added something to Windows that they want to change that is going to be a function that takes constant screen caps of your system.
And what you're doing, and so it can say, so if you go, I was doing something last week. I don't remember what I was doing, but it was really cool. It'd be great if I could look that up. And Microsoft goes, gotcha, man. And you're like, yeah, but this is also a privacy nightmare. Because the first version of it, of course, stored everything in plain text.
Yeah.
And it was trivial from one user account to see another user account's stuff.
Yep. I mean,
which could be very concerning if someone in your household is searching something they don't want a spouse or parent to find out about.
Or
and
child.
I'm not even talking about Christmas presents.
Yeah. Well, it depends on the Christmas present. So they held it back because at first they were like, oh, we have all these security problems. All right, we'll hold it back until we fix it. And it was supposed to be coming out soon. And now they're like, we got to fix it again.
Yeah, they did change it after a lot of feedback saying, what is wrong with you, to make it opt-in. You have to turn it on. Now, the problem I have is Microsoft is known to be a little buggy on things, and I fully expect some update to accidentally turn it on. Or someone to have malware that turns it on.
It can be removed now. They said in September that you'll be able to remove it, which probably they got some calls from the State Department and every other company on earth and
various government agencies, important companies that said, we're going to switch to Linux if you don't let us remove this.
Yeah, get this the hell off our system. So I do not. This is always a lot of this whole AI crap is a solution in search for a problem. This is specifically a feature for people who don't understand that you have a browser history, is what this is. This is because if you're doing something on your system and you need to look it up, it's typically something you were doing in a browser. Like on the rare instance, you were doing something in, say, Photoshop, or you were doing so any of those other things, you have saved the file. If you didn't save the file,
hopefully saved the file, or sometimes a lot of those programs do have incremental
backups.
Saves that go, hey, dude, this crashed last time you used it. Do you want to open your file that you might have been working on? And sometimes you go, no, I remember I was wrong. I don't want to open that.
Pretty much everything on your computer saves itself, saves what you're doing in some way or form.
Even Notepad these days, I think, does it.
Yeah. This is just, hey, look at this neat thing we can do. Which is sort of like, when a kid discovers they can do a backflip. They just want to show everybody they can do a backflip. It's not real useful, but they're going to come up to you at like a family reunion or church or a funeral, and they're going to be like, hey, you want to see I can do a backflip?
Only if you mess it up, man. I'd love to see you mess it up. Let me get the camera first, because in case you mess it up, I don't know if America's Funniest Home Videos is still out there, but you'll be a YouTube hit.
That's what a lot of this thing is. This is a lot of this is just a 4-year-old doing a backflip. It's not useful for anything. It's not productive. It's not really valuable, but cool. It's a 4-year-old doing a backflip. That's neat, I guess. Yay. Now we're going to go to the wake, sweetie. We'll see. Come on. Let's, what the fuck, They have this technology that kind of does a thing, but it's not really a useful thing. It's like, I remember.
You just described all of AI.
I remember a while back, AMD's engineers were talking after the bulldozer crap and all that. Threadripper was an accident when they had just designed Ryzen. Well, not really an accident. It wasn't official. Threadripper was a couple of engineers after hours screwing around with Ryzen chiplets and going, hey, we can strap 4 of these fuckers together. Look at this. This fucker's got 32 cores now. Holy shit. And they brought they brought the project to management. And manager was like, fuck yeah, we'll sell this. That's sort of the opposite of AI. This is a bunch of engineers. AI is a bunch of engineers screwing around with something. Hey, look at this. And it's not really useful, but they spent a lot of money and time on it. So they're like, fuck, what do we do? Well, speaking of something that spent a lot of money and time, I will be the first to admit I was wrong about this. This is actually getting a little scary in some ways. When Apple said they were going to switch from Intel to their own designed ARM CPUs for desktop. I was of the opinion that it was not going to work because
it'd be a thing for a couple releases, and then they'd go, "Yeah, no, we're going back."
Yeah, I figured that there was no way they could get Macintoshes working with ARM, and they not only did they. This is actually really impressive. They have close to a release of Cyberpunk 2077 on the new Apple Silicon Macs.
With the expansion,
Phantom Liberty, all that. Apple has developed their own graphics API that's similar to DirectX. They call it Metal FX. And they're doing translations. It has upscaling. It has a lot of the same features that Windows does. It's about as good as AMD's FSR technology, which is not as good as NVIDIA's DLSS, but the fact it's on a Mac, there is not a dedicated GPU. It's all on the CPU. It's all on one single chip doing it all, much like a gaming console. And apparently the performance is about as good as, say, an Xbox or a PS5 or something like that. Which, again, there are limitations there because, they don't have the same graphics performance. But in terms of good enough to game, like having the whole idea of Macintoshes being good enough to game, I was amazed they had Baldur's Gate 3 running on the damn thing. Now, however, this is viable Mac gaming. It just blows my mind. That has almost never been a thing. How long did it take for Macintosh to get a World of Warcraft client?
Oh, I don't know. It was sometime after the original.
Oh yeah,
client.
it took.
I want to say there was something that you could, an emulator that would say, "Hey, I'm going to pretend to be Windows and do stuff." Or am I thinking of Linux? I'm thinking of Linux.
Linux, yeah.
Wine. I was thinking of Wine. That's what I was thinking of.
No, it's crazy to think of native gaming on a Macintosh. Like, even like for the longest time, if you wanted to try to game on a Macintosh, you had to do Paradox, or what is it? Paradox, Parallels, and dual boot Windows onto it. And then run it on and it would play about as well as a laptop, which was about that was as good as the chip they were putting into most Macintoshes and desktop Macs and it was about as good as a laptop Intel CPU. Now on ARM, it's just blowing my mind. Now, what's going to be the milestone, the real mile marker, is when Apple releases an Apple Silicon Mac Pro and with a PCIe slot that will accept a standard off-the-shelf NVIDIA GPU. Or hell, even an AMD GPU. When they can do that, when you could just slot in an NVIDIA, like a discrete graphics card, that's when the entire x86 landscape is going to be like, bruh. That's when Intel and AMD are going to be like, bruh. Because shit. And the advances in Apple Silicon, that's the other thing. It's been so fast. They keep improving and improving and improving and improving.
Well, I think part of that is because they've got, there's less stakeholders arguing over what the improvements should be.
Mm.
When you've got conflicting or when you've got a consortium of saying, having to argue over, well, these instructions should go in the instruction set. These things should go in this, back and forth, taking years, versus basically one unit saying, okay, let's speed this up. We're going to do this. And Dave had a great idea on how to, some additions to the instruction set. We're predicting a 3% increase off just of what Dave had.
I'll tell you, if Qualcomm manages to get their Windows on ARM shit off the ground with the Snapdragon X Elite, and they resolve their shit with ARM and their license and everything,
it's a big if right now.
It's gonna be weird. We obviously are gonna have to reach a point where computers change. They always have. They changed from the way we did it in the 80s and 90s. Socketed CPUs weren't originally, kind of a thing. That changed, and then we had those. Yeah. Like there were a lot of systems where you had the 8086 processor and the coprocessor. Those were not like shit. They didn't even need cooling back then. They didn't have any cooling systems. Cooling systems became a thing. That was something we had to take into account and accommodate. And the idea we could shift away from x86 entirely. I mean, it is an aging architecture. It's been remarkable the amount we've been able to keep doing with it, but it is coming up to, it's showing its age. We are running into the tricks we're having to come up with: multiple cores, multiple CCDs, tiles, Infinity Fabric. All of these tricks we're having to come up with to try and eat more power out of x86, where ARM is still showing promise and room for expansion, and it's an open platform. If you license it, it is an open platform that's compatible with tons of systems. And right now, like as it stands right now, if AMD and Intel if either AMD or Intel went under, we would be left with one company in the world that the license to make x86 CPUs, which is the majority of desktop systems and a majority of laptop systems. We'd have one company. That would be fucking precarious. ARM, however, anyone can make an ARM CPU. They just have to license it. ARM will license it to any company. If you pay the fee, you can make an X8. They will work with you. They will make an ARM CPU for you.
Yes.
If you is
doing your licensing properly.
That is a much more, for me, it's not ideal, but it's a much more comfortable situation than x86 being balanced on. Intel's not doing great lately. Like, Intel is much larger than AMD, but it also has a lot more balls in the air, and it's dropping the balls. It's dropping balls. The balls are everywhere. There's so many balls. Intel is at a fucking precarious stage. I'm sure someone could buy them out, blah, 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 but it's still, it's tricky.
Depending on who wants to buy them out, they might be blocked from buying them out.
It's just, it's crazy. So this is going to be the next step. I say if we're by the end of the 2030s, if x86 is still a dominant platform, I will be very surprised. Very surprised.
Well, we've got a few years left on that prediction.
Yeah. That's 15 years, but All right. That's the news for this week. Now it's time to get to your questions. If you have them for us, you can send those to requests@radiodeadair.com, like it says on the screen, and we will attempt to help you out with them. Okay. Holy crap. We got a big old one here. This is from Lee. Hi, Nash, Mike, and creatures of fur. You hear that, Charlie? Say hi, buddy. He's like, what? Little stoner cat. I've been having some computer issues, and the classic Google the error message is turning up nothing. Several months ago now, I rebuilt my desktop computer, updated everything except the power supply and the case. For a while, all good until it started to have issues on startup. Now, I want to hold on for a second here. Everything except the power supply. Put a big asterisk by that. We might circle back around to it. For a while, all good until it started to have issues on startup. Sometimes when I started up, none of my peripherals would turn on. Computer was running, but screens, mouse, keyboards, speaker, and headphones were all dead to the world. Usually turning it off and back on would fix the problem. Sometimes when I did, I'd get an error message, devices changed, or CPU or memory, or CMOS has been cleared. Please enter setup, configure system, plus F1. That's, yeah. I've never changed my settings off default because I'm sort of tech savvy, but not that tech savvy. So either going to the BIOS and changing nothing or telling it load default worked. Then it would boot up normally continue. However, this problem got more frequent and I couldn't turn on the computer at all. Eventually, I got with some help, I managed to find a similar problem online. The issue had been dud RAM. I checked all the RAM, one stick at a time, until I found one of them that did indeed seem to be a dud. I took out that stick plus one, have been using 2 sticks of RAM, that's another asterisk right there, in the computer ever since, the ones that I had assumed to be fine. Recently, though, the problem started again. Twice in the last month or so, I've had the computer start up without starting my peripherals, had the same error about devices changing. Here's the question. Should I give the RAM another test in case I got 2 duds? If it's the RAM, should I worry about something computer? And if it's not the RAM, is there another source of the issue I can investigate? Build is Gigabyte B650XAX motherboard, Ryzen 5 7600, X Power 2 by 16 gigabyte 5600 RAM, Radeon RX 7600, and using Win 10, currently resisting Win 11. It's nothing to do with Windows 11, so take that into account.
Yeah.
Okay.
So my first thought when I see CMOS errors like that is maybe the CMOS battery. But the fact that it went away for a while and then came back sort of steers me away from that because it would just continue otherwise.
I'm feeling like all right. Modern CPUs used to be RAM control was handled by the motherboard. Now it's all handled inside the CPU. And there are multiple channels that are typically there are on a Ryzen CPU, there are dual channels. Hey, Casey Explosion, how you doing? On a Ryzen CPU, there are 2 channels. And each channel has 2 sticks of RAM. What I think, and this is going off what you're saying here, and the fact that the BIOS was saying, "Oh, there's a new CPU. What's going on?" It feels to me like one of your controller, one of the channels being controlled by the CPU went bad, which does happen. You can have CPUs quite often in failed CPUs. Not that CPUs fail often, but that you can see in CPUs that fail. One of the large things that happens is part of the memory controller will die. But if the other channel is still functioning, then you're fine. You can still run it. It won't run properly, but it will still have RAM and it will still work properly and it will still,
it'll still be a computer.
It'll still be a computer. So, and the fact that now, after a while, it's starting to do it again, that may mean that the other channel, it might be that CPU is just having an issue. Now, if it's 7600, you may still be in the warranty area. Drake Mayer saying, if you didn't configure the RAM in BIOS, it might not be configured for that RAM. Well, Drake, if it went back to the defaults, it would have been fine because
it should have been fine.
Should have been fine. If DDR runs at its default speeds, which is really low, it's like DDR 4300, 4600, something like that. It's pretty low. And it's made so that you can just plug that in and you'll have speed issues when you're trying to do like gaming and video and stuff like that, but it still will work. It's the default settings will work just fine. So that one of the things I think may be at fault here is this could potentially be the um voltages need to be boosted for some RAM. Not running at default though. All DDR5 should run at the default speeds without having to boost the voltages. And by default, I'm not talking XMP. I'm talking the non-XMP. That's what defaults are. You have to deliberately turn XMP on. So the RAM should run without if RAM won't run without increasing the voltages, then it's running out of spec, and that's bad RAM. It shouldn't do that. You're selling bad products. I'm thinking, Lee. I'm thinking this is either the CPU or less of a chance of it, but still possible. You said you replaced everything but the power supply. The fact that if
a thing to check with that, because I've run into this multiple occasions, is make sure all your power supply connections are seated properly. You may have to unplug and replug things just to make sure that the connection's on there. I had a problem with that with a computer many years ago. I thought I had it plugged in properly, and the computer was doing all kinds of wacky stuff. And since I bought the parts, I took it in, and the guy said, "Oh, unplugged it." He said, "Yeah, that wasn't clipped down properly." Plugged it in way harder than I thought was necessary to push it, but then and no problem since.
I don't think that power supply is going bad, but it is a candidate because it's it's still an older component. Another thing
with the power supply, I would run a power supply calculator, just web page app, put in your components, and make sure you have enough power supply there to cover what you had. You maybe thought, "Oh, I'm riding it a little close." Maybe if it started to go, it's not providing the power that everything needs.
We're pretty low power on this one. It's an RX 7600 and a Ryzen 5 7600. That's a 60 watt CPU. That's not even like that one doesn't have a boost on it. Well, it has boost, but it doesn't have the precision. Anyway, the other thing that could be happening with the CPU is something with the since we went from the pin grid array to the LAN grid array. That's how the pins connect to the motherboard. It used to be there were a bunch of little pins on the bottom of the CPU, and you would fit them into this little grid of sockets and put them in together, and they would all definitely press down in there. So there was no question about things connecting. When we went to taking the pins off the CPU and putting it on the motherboard, instead of them fitting in, now they just push against. And there are issues with the LAN grid array connections on a CPU. Sometimes, if they're not getting enough contact, if there's not enough pressure or too much pressure is another issue. If there's not enough pressure or too much pressure on the CPU, that can cause memory problems. And it can also cause problems as if the CPU is behaving badly. You don't mention what cooler you have on it. This won't cost you a dime except having to reapply thermal paste. I would recommend reseating your CPU and cooler, and please be very gentle when you put that CPU back in. In fact, when you do, look really close. If you have a magnifying glass or something, I'd recommend it. Look at all the pins on the motherboard in that socket. See if any of them seem bent or out of place. That could be causing issues as well. Then I would very carefully reseat the CPU again after you check for bent and misaligned pins. Close it down. Very carefully reseat your CPU cooler. Try to make sure it's on there tight, but not... You don't have to torque down the screws on most coolers. Once you get it to where once you get it to where the screwdriver doesn't have to be forcibly turned, when the screwdriver just puts a gentle amount of pressure on it and it stops, you typically have enough contact with the CPU. And also considering this is a Ryzen 5 7600, it's not throwing off a ton of heat anyway. So try reseating the CPU in the socket, examine the pins in the socket, make sure none are bent, and then reseat the cooler on top of it. This may simply be misaligned CPU or too much pressure on it. And if that's the case, then that costs you like whatever much thermal paste you had to reapply. If that doesn't do it, it does feel like this might be a CPU issue. And I don't think it's the motherboard. It would be weird if this is the motherboard because the motherboard doesn't have memory controllers on it. And the fact, but it could be. It could be, but it would be weird if it was to me. My thinking on this is CPU. If installing it doesn't work, maybe you might want to start looking for thinking about an RMA on it to move forward from there. That's just my troubleshooting. That's the process I would take. So good luck going from there, Lee. You have anything else to add, Mike?
No, I think we've got, we've covered the possibilities here.
I mean, yeah, if you want to, if someone can loan you some cheap RAM, like even a couple of 8 gig sticks, just to test out and see if that behaves itself where the other RAM doesn't. Maybe you did get a bad kit of RAM. Maybe the RAM's acting up. So, but the idea that you have 2 is unusual.
It's extremely unlikely. Let's go with that.
Hey, Nash and Mike. This is from Sammy. I wanted to set up a cheap media server for my house, and I was considering a Raspberry Pi. Do you have any experience with setting one up for this purpose? A Pi 5
Nope.
and a kit with memory and everything is about $150, and that's about the limit I could afford to spend on it if I want to get an external hard drive for media storage as well. What do I need to know to get it to work? Are there any distro tricks for Raspbian that I should know about in advance? Raspbian is the Linux / Debian in distro for Raspberry Pi. All right. Well, first off, Sammy, let me tell you that while a Raspberry Pi can work as a media server, it is not recommended. Because power to performance wise, it just cannot handle the transcoding and the encoding as well as other CPUs. And even I gotta say, even at about $150 for that kit, I know just the base Raspberry Pi is like $80 now. That still strikes me as pricey for the performance it offers. It's kind of been lapped in a lot of ways. When the Raspberry Pi first came out, it offered a lot of performance for a little bit of money, but now it's offering some performance for a lot of money. And it's not as simple as it once was. I know you say you're tight on cash. I personally, I'll tell you what I did when I was tight on cash and trying to run a media server first time. I used an old laptop.
Yeah.
Even
I was about to say, where's my recommendation here would be go to Goodwill, find a decent laptop. You're probably going to want to put a new hard drive in it.
Yeah.
New for whatever it is, because you just don't necessarily want to trust what may be on the media on that. And it'll be way more powerful than whatever you could get out of a Raspberry Pi, and you can probably end up spending less money.
Yeah, and when we say old laptop, you could go as far back. Now, I will recommend for this purpose, look for an Intel-based laptop, because Intel has a function with their CPUs where it can leverage the built-in GPU to do what we call it QuickSync. That's it, QuickSync. It can leverage the built-in GPU to increase transcoding and encoding speeds. That makes it better in a lot of cases for a media server than an AMD-based system, because their transcoding thing is not as far along as Intel has been doing this stuff for a long time. So it is one thing they have it in their favor. So if you get something like, I'd go back to maybe Intel 6000 series.
Yeah,
Not
an
too much further
i5.
back. Yeah, i5, i7 if possible. Um, or maybe even a cheap desktop if you can find one back that far. Um, Laptops are kind of better in a way because they use a lot less power. So that would put it about on a par with the Raspberry Pi for what? Well, actually, the Raspberry Pi uses very little power, but it would be a lot closer to a Raspberry Pi in power consumption than a full desktop system would be. Um, that way you could, in terms of the media server, you could just run a regular Linux distribution. I'm running Mint on my media server right now. I was running Windows on it, but I was having issues with that. And Linux is free. So yeah, Linux Mint is decent enough. You can run your Plex, or what is the other one? KMS. What is it called? KMS Medium Server, I think.
I use Plex.
Whatever.
So.
Yeah, I use Plex too.
Now
I want to
say
try
in the laptop field, if you can find an old Office HP EliteBook, the reason I say that, we said an Intel processor, and it is an Intel thing. The HP EliteBook G3, G4 series are very repairable as well. So if you accidentally break the computer somehow, they're very easy. There's a lot of parts in there that you can just take out, pop in a new part, and you're done. Screen's an easy replace if you break it. The fan's an easy replace if it dies.
Yeah, and you can also there are settings in Linux where you can set the laptop so that you can close it, the screen will turn off, but the system will stay on. And that's just do that. Put that
you
on
can do that in Windows too. So
yeah, just close it, put it on a shelf, and you're done. Even if the battery isn't working great to hold the charge anymore, that probably won't matter because as a media server, you're going to leave it plugged in all the time anyway.
So I would check that battery periodically. If it starts to swell, dispose
of it properly. Replace it. It's just a boom, bad. That's bad.
But fortunately, like I say, the batteries on those are also relatively inexpensive. You can get third-party batteries on it as well. So
I honestly can't recommend. I mean, Raspberry Pi still has its place and whatnot, but they are kind of falling behind. I couldn't recommend them for this purpose. I think getting a like $100, $200 laptop from Goodwill or used or Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist or something like that, or even eBay, you look and see if you can find some of those. That might be a better option for you overall than going with the Raspberry Pi for this purpose. And it's a pretty affordable one too. So, pardon me. All right. Last one is from Marcus. He says, hi, Nash and Mike and Floofs. This one's going to be quick. Do you have any way to tell if a power supply is dying? My system has been acting funky lately. It's been rebooting like I hit the reset button, even though I didn't. Trying to figure out if there's something bad with my wiring so I can call my landlord about it. But if that's not it, I want to know what I need to get to fix it. Budget is tight right now, so I'd like to know in advance what to buy to resolve this. Any ideas? If
you hadn't said the budget was tight, I would say throw a UPS in line and see how often the UPS triggers.
Yeah, well, uninterruptible power supply is a good thing for anyone to get. Even if it's a relatively small one, anything that lets you keep your computer on for a few more minutes while the power is out so you can properly shut it down is well worth, like $50 or so, or however much, even a basic one. Because you're not going to keep this thing running 20 minutes on a full desktop, depending on a small uninterruptible power supply. But just a basic one. However, the fact that, an easy way to try it is you'll need an extension cord, is to try a socket in your house that's on a different breaker. I'm pretty sure you have access to, even an apartment has access to the breakers in that particular apartment.
Usually, yes.
Yeah. Move the, Oh, hey, Drake, that is much simpler. Yes, thank you. Drake says, put a lamp on the same plug as the PC. If the PC resets but the light doesn't flicker, not a wiring issue. Thank you. Yeah, I was thinking about running a fucking extension cord to another room. That's a much better plan. Yes. If you have another device on the same, if like a lamp on the same circuit, yes, very good, Drake. If that doesn't go out but the PC does, not a wiring issue.
Then that does sound like a power supply or some internal. I have seen a case once where there was some corrosion on the power button connections, and that caused the machine to flicker. You replace the power supply, it's still happening. Oh, check out your wiring in the computer.
Another simple thing to do is go through and check every power supply connection in your system. Make sure they're in there secure and pressed in fully and nothing is loose.
Which is something I said earlier in a different question.
And also make sure nothing is being bent or crimped. None of the wires are being pushed together because that could cause a short. And that could be causing what you're experiencing. There are relatively cheap power supply testers, but I found, though oddly enough, power supply testers are not definitive. Like with bad problems with the power supply, you can definitely call it with the power supply tester. But sometimes little intermittent ones, or maybe something like a bad capacitor, the power supply testers don't always catch it because it's not always something that is constant. So if you, all right, so if the light thing doesn't work and you check all your connections and it still keeps doing it, power supply, you don't tell us how old the power supply is, but it might be time to start looking into getting a new one.
Fortunately, power supplies don't seem to be terribly expensive right now, unless you're going for like a 1200 watt one.
Yeah, depends. The prices have come down a bit. And, we always, Corsair is a pretty good manufacturer. Seasonic is a good manufacturer. Even Micro Center's in-house brand is apparently, people have good things to say about that. So, all right, I'm going to double check and make sure we don't have anything new, but I think that's everything for this week. Yep, that's going to do it. All right, folks, we will be back next Saturday, 9 p.m. Eastern. If you have tech questions for me or Mike, you can send those to requests@radiodeadair.com. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. Good night, everybody.